This is the European History Lecture for Tuesday, the 21st of September, 2021, for Ancient and Medieval History. Last time we got into a rather in-depth discussion about hereditary guilt, because hereditary guilt is behind so much misery in the world. The notion that you can somehow get something from the descendants of people who did something that you think is unjust to your ancestors. That kind of justice is impossible. But most people don't accept that. No, they want to get their pound of flesh. So they also want life to make sense. And if you have a group that you hate, that you can blame on everything that's wrong in your life, well, on some level, that's easier than accepting responsibility for the way your life has turned out. I have relatives in the greater New York area who came from Puerto Rico in the 1950s who never worked, not a steady job. They've been supported by the U.S. government. They've been supported by my tax dollars. And they blame everything on racism. 3 generations of it. No, it's their fault. They chose not to work. They chose not to discipline themselves. They chose to be takers and not producers. And this is true. The great secret of America and of life. Yes, I'm going to arrogate unto myself the role of telling you the great secret of life in America. Well, this is one. Take it or leave it, believe it or not. Your life is yours. And the older you get, the less it's your parents' fault. The older you get, the less it's your origin's fault. You may come from wealth, you may come from poverty, you may come from a musical family, you may come from a family where you're the first person to finish high school. You may come from a school that works or that doesn't work. You may have had to fight your way for everything just to get half of what your fellow people have given to them. Or you may have everything given to you on a silver platter. After a certain point, none of that matters. In America, you're free to choose. You're free to make your own destiny. There is no privilege. There is no limit that's going to affect it beyond a very limited point. Every one of us can work hard. Every one of us can choose to achieve. Every one of us can take the talents that we've been given and develop them. It's not perfect, it's not pretty, and it's not easy. But Mr. Tenorio, that's so heartless. Don't you take into account systemic racism and poverty? No, because we talked about this yesterday. I don't believe in them. I believe they're excuses, just like the anti-Semitism of Hitler was an excuse. You didn't get a job, the Jews did it. You got laid off, the Jews did it. Your wife left you for another man, the Jews did it. Well, if it's the Jews' fault, you don't have to change. If it's the white person's fault, or the black person's fault, or any other group that is targeted for hate, if it's their fault, you don't have to change. You're fine. It's the world that's wrong. That may work if you're born into a slave society, but you're free. The glory of the American way is this. If at any point in your life, remember this, especially if you're depressed. At any point in life in the United States, you can hit rock bottom and bounce back. At any point, you can take responsibility and say, yeah, my life didn't turn out the way I expected it to, and this is why it's my fault. And if it's my fault, then I can fix it. I can change course. I can make better choices. I can work harder. I can be more honest. I can hope rather than fear. Anyone in the United States has the ability to turn their life around for the better. Because as free people, you can rightly say, when life doesn't turn out right, this is what I did wrong, This is what I can do to fix it. And if I have the guts, I can change my life for the better. No one need be helpless. No one need be hopeless. No one need think that they are a permanent, perpetual waste of space failure. It's not true. Success means different things to different people, but anyone, if they take heart and choose to fight, can make their life better. No one in the United States is a permanent prisoner of their circumstances, not unless they are crippled, not unless they are physically handicapped. And even they, if you know of people who are physically handicapped, some of them overcome all that. They don't let it stop them. So, the hate group of the Jews is targeted for pogroms in Russia again and again and again. But it's very Russian. It's chaotic, it's passionate, it's wild, it's unpredictable. The pogroms are the officially sanctioned anti-Jewish riots. Well, in the 1930s, Hitler decides that he wants to experiment with this. When a German diplomat in Paris is killed by a Jew, it's the signal. It's also, let's see, the beer hall putsch was in early November 1922. This is 1938, so that's what, the 14th anniversary. Hitler is celebrating the 14th anniversary of his first attempt to seize power, which failed. And so, because this diplomat dies, and because Hitler is curious, would a pogrom work in Germany? As sunset falls across Germany, in every city neighborhood, in every town, in every community of farmers, the Nazi local Gauleiter, or regional leader, began to call people together. People came bringing wood, wheelbarrows full, and they came with bricks, wheelbarrows full, truckloads of them. And they began to call the membership together and the people together. Bonfires were built and speeches railing against the Jews who killed that German diplomat, railing against the Jews that have been allowed to continue to live in Germany, but as second-class citizens, railing against them, so that by full dark, the crowd is whipped up into a frothing rage. And it just so happened that these bonfires and these piles of rocks and these piles of bricks are near the Jewish neighborhoods. And when the crowd is loosed, as firemen and police look on smiling, they're there to make sure that the fires and the violence don't spread to German homes and German businesses. People pick up rocks and start breaking the windows of every Jewish business and every Jewish home in Germany. This is called Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. It is the German national pogrom. Reich Kristallnacht, Imperial Night of Broken Glass. After the glass is broken, Juden, kommen! Jew, come here! Jewish men are called out, and boys, and they are beaten in front of their families. Sometimes they are crippled in front of their families. If a Jew fights back, he's going away to a concentration camp to be gathered with the other undesirables and subhumans that the Nazis described. Maybe he'll be killed on the spot. Maybe he'll come back crippled. Maybe he'll come back psychologically broken. But he'll never be the same. Then the crowds go in. They loot the businesses. and they loot the homes. As the women and children look on, and they're lucky if they are allowed to look on, a lifetime of memories is brutalized and stolen. Everyone knows the Jewish men can't protect their women or children. No one is safe. Not from the righteous anger of the German people. And the next morning, across the German Reich, palls of smoke rise from every Jewish temple and synagogue that are being allowed to burn to the ground. Reich Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, the German pogrom, early November 1938. It's one of the few times that the German people actually try to push back. Yes?
How do you spell that?
Kristallnacht. 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 Although I've heard it spelled with a Y. That isn't how I remember it. From all over Germany, housewives begin to talk to their friends who are the wives of Nazi officials. My children were kept awake as men were beaten within sight of their bedrooms. My children saw the houses of their neighbors burned to the ground. My children saw looting and violence on their street where they play with their toys and their little friends. This is not in Ordnung. Now, in German, that means in order. And if anything is true, the German housewife kept things in order in her home. But how can she keep things in order when this sort of violence, this barbarity, erupts in the streets? The protest is so strong, it reaches Hitler's ears. He learns a lesson. The German people are actually quietly, through the womenfolk, pushing back, and he backs off. Never again will there be so public and anti-Semitic violence within Germany. From now on, after Kristallnacht, everything will be done more subtly, more behind the scenes, so that the German people can have deniability. So that after the war, many Germans go, we didn't know what happened to Jews. The Jews, they just disappeared. They just were there one day and then they were gone the next. I don't know what happened to them. Plausible deniability allows the Germans not to connect the dots about the Jews and to just imagine that, well, it's not my problem. I'm not going to think about it. The government, after Kristallnacht, makes that easy. That tells you something about psychology, but there's something much more damning about Kristallnacht, more damning than even what I just told you. The crowds that did all this were not strangers. They weren't people bussed in. They were the very neighbors that Jews had lived with for generations. They were the people that loaned each other sugar when one person ran out. They looked after each other's kids before the Nazis' time. They were neighbors in each other's lives. It was people who personally knew the Jewish families that were being victimized, that did the victimization. Now, what does that tell you about the human psychology that was at work? What would it take for you? Maybe you don't like your neighbors, but what would it take for you to go into a riot where your neighbors were beaten almost to death in front of you? Maybe you did the beating, and where you looted their businesses, burned their houses of worship, and stole things from every room in their home. It was not strangers, it was neighbors that did it. That indicates to you, or it should indicate to you, the power of hate. Hate can make people, it's like love. The opposite of love. The opposite, can any of you tell me what the opposite of love is? What is the opposite of love?
Anger or hate.
That is the logical answer, but it's actually, in my opinion, not correct. Here's why. Both love and hate involve intense, intimate regard. To hate someone, you need to know them, you need to care about them, they need to matter to you. The same is true for love. To me, the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. Because if you could care less about someone, it doesn't matter what they do, what happens to them, who they are. But if you love or hate someone, even though your intentions towards them are opposite, you care. It matters to you. You don't have to agree, but you see my point. The Nazis turned neighbor against neighbor, and the Germans said yes. But Hitler's never doing that again. So now we go to the very German approach to you shall not live. When World War II began, Hitler, in his speech declaring war against Poland, warned the world's Jews not to get involved. He was speaking particularly to the American government with that, because even then, many of the world's Jews had moved from Russia to the United States, and Hitler believed that the United States was dominated by Jewish interests. So Hitler warned that if the Jews got involved, that things would go very badly for the Jews that are still within Hitler's power. Now, the United States remains neutral from 1939 until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941. But long before that, the United States government was aiding the Allies who were fighting the Germans with money, with materials, with weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, with shipping. American warships were even fighting German submarines during the 5 or 6 months before we officially get involved in World War II. The crews of 2 destroyers that were sunk, or many were killed, their families were told that these men died in training accidents. It wasn't until later that I'm having difficulty remembering the names of the ships. I think one of them is the Reuben James, but I could be wrong. In any event, the crews of the ships were told that they were killed in training accidents. It wasn't until later that they were told the truth, that they were killed in combat against German submarines, or German U-boats, sending supplies to Britain and Russia. The Jews of Europe that Hitler captured were identified and were moved to ghettos. The Warsaw Ghetto, in the city, the capital of Poland, was intended to house 10, 20, 30,000 people. The Nazis jammed a couple 100,000 people into the Warsaw Ghetto. The crowding, the disease, the filth, the lack of food and water allowed many Jews to die of natural causes in the ghettos. If Jews had been World War I heroes who fought for Germany, or scientists, or former politicians, well connected, they were sent to a special ghetto in what had been Czechoslovakia, called Theresienstadt. It was a medieval city ghetto near Prague. From the outside, it looked like a hill with trees around it. The hill was a berm connected to a wall. Jews had a whole city inside this hill. There's even a movie where Hitler had made about how good life was for the Jews in Theresienstadt. It's a Nazi propaganda film called Hitler Gives the Jews a Town. I knew somebody who was there and who later went to Auschwitz. She worked with me in the library at Bates College for one summer. As a librarian, she worked there. So Jews were gathered during the early conquests that Hitler made when he conquered Poland, Norway, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, France. His allies, Italy, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, all gathered the Jews and separated them from everyone else. You may not live as one of us, you may not live among us, was achieved. About 6 months before we get attacked by the Japanese and drawn into World War II, it's June of 1941. Hitler has been able to do everything so far because he made a deal with the Russians. The communist Russians partnered up with Hitler to split Eastern Europe. Stalin, the leader of the communist Russians, got part of Eastern Europe. Hitler, the leader of the German National Socialists, got the other half. But Hitler had written a book where he said that the ultimate destiny of the German people is to take over vast areas of Russia and the Ukraine, White Russia, Belarus, and so forth, and have what the Germans called Lebensraum, living space. In the spring of 1941, instead of conquering Britain, which still held out against him, which is what Stalin expected him to do, Hitler snuck his armies, and on June 21st, 1941, across the entire 1,000-mile front from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, Hitler's forces invaded Russia. Now, Germany and Russia had fought countless wars over the centuries. The invasion was nothing new. However, behind Hitler's troops came black uniformed Einsatzkommandos, special commandos, with skulls and crossbones on their hats and on their collars. Death commandos, Einsatzkommandos, organized in groups. When they came to a newly captured Russian village, they'd ask the Russians, "Where are the Jews?" And the Russians, being anti-Semites, many of them, pointed out the Jews. And the Jews were separated and taken away into a forest half mile to a mile away. Far enough away so the Russians wouldn't see or hear what's going on. Many of the Russians welcomed the Germans because the communists had been such terrible leaders. What the Einsatzgruppen then did, the Einsatzkommandos, the special commandos then did, the death commandos, is they'd have the Jews dig a long trench in the middle of the woods. And then most of the Jews, except for 10 or 20 of them, would be lined up with their heels over the edge, standing on the balls of their feet. Men, women, children, grandmothers holding babies. And the Einsatzkommandos would then take their rifles and fire down their iron sights, shooting all of them. And the way they were positioned, they would naturally fall into the trench. The 10 or 20 left, 10 or 20 Jews who were left, would then get powdered lye, which is a powdery acid, and dump it onto the bodies of their relatives, their wives, their children. That would decompose the bodies quickly. Then the Jews would cover over the trench. Then those 10 or 20 would either be loaded into trucks to be Sonderkommandos, work companies for the Nazis, where they themselves would be lined up on the edge of the trench that wasn't filled in yet, and they would all be shot. And then the Einsatzkommandos would get the Russians or get somebody, or they themselves would cover it over, and they'd move on to the next village. An efficient Einsatz group could hit 2 or 3 villages a day. What about the cities? Well, near the city of Minsk is a quarry, a sand pit, at a place called Babi Yar. In the ghetto at Minsk, there were over 50,000 Jews, and over the course of 2 days, the ghetto was systematically emptied of all their men, women, and children. Outside of Minsk, the men were separated from the women and children, and the men were taken first, and they were told to strip, and all of their stuff was put on different tables, their belts, their rings, their glasses, their trousers, their socks, their shoes. The Germans were very meticulous about taking everything off the bodies, no wedding rings. And then the men were ordered to run, not walk, run down a forest path. So as the sun dapples through the leaves, the Jews are running naked, the Jewish men. Any Jew who slows down gets hit with a rifle butt or shot. And then as they run hither and yon through the woods, they come to a clearing, an area where the sun blinds them, and they just run in the path following them along the edge of a sand pit. On the other side of a sand pit are a couple of machine gun crews, and as the Jews run past, they are systematically shot. Over a period of 2 days, the entire ghetto is killed in this fashion. But that's a problem. The Einsatzkommandos don't do the job that Hitler wants in the way he wants it for a few reasons. First of all, bullets cost money. Second of all, there's a war on. And these troops this is a manpower-heavy solution. These troops could be used in battle against the Russians or the British or the Americans, and they're not. They're being used to kill Jews. But the real reason why Hitler and his people have to abandon primarily using the Einsatzkommandos to wipe out the Jews of Russia is because many of them, when they go home on leave, can't get the sight of the faces of the women and children that they have shot. It's one thing to believe that you are wiping out human cancer, that you are wiping out subhuman animals that steal all the goodness out of life, to tell yourself that you're a soldier of politics, that you're a soldier of ideology. But when your job is to stare down your iron sights and kill civilians, to kill babies, to kill children, there comes a point where you can't lie about what you've done, not to yourself. So very many of the Einsatzkommandos the suicide rate of Hitler's most devoted followers goes through the roof. They can't live with it. They can't live with it. You don't want your most true believers killing themselves in large numbers. You don't want to also waste manpower or bullets. So in early 1942, after the United States has gotten involved in the war, after the first winter, or during the first winter of fighting between Germany and Russia, in a moment, a conference is held outside of Berlin, south of Berlin, near a lake called Wannsee. The Wannsee Conference plans out how the final solution to the Jewish problem will be achieved. Yes, and I recommend that if you want my attention, I'm not noticing you because your hand is sort of there, so just let me know. What is it?
Oh, I was just wondering how to spell Einsatz.
Don't worry about it. It's not going to be a vocab word. I'll tell you, though. E-I-N, as in Nancy, Z-A-T-Z K-O-M-M-A-N-D-O. Einzatzkommandos. Einzatzkommandos. Those are the death set commandos. They're part of the SS, which was Hitler's priesthood, Hitler's truest believers. Now understand, the final solution to the Jewish question. That's what's called a euphemism. And euphemism is a vocab word. E-U-P-H-E-M-I-S-M. 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 Euphemism. And what a euphemism is soft language to hide hard truth. Soft language to hide hard truth. Soft language to hide hard truth. Got this from the comedian George Carlin. I am not claiming original ownership of it. Here's the story of a euphemism. It'll give you a clear idea of what it is. In World War I, for the first time, human beings were subjected to long, ongoing, sometimes days or even weeks-long artillery barrages. The thing about an artillery barrage is it shakes the earth, it concusses the air. You don't know when you're going to get hit. And it's not a matter of the brave survive and the cowards die. It's random. You've got explosive shells landing all around you. Even if you're in an underground bunker, a direct hit will bury you alive. And because of the nature of bullets, you hear the near misses. You never hear the bullet that kills you. You never hear the shell that's going to get you, because they're traveling faster than sound. A natural human nervous system clenches every time this happens. Fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight. 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, 14 days of constant shelling. The human nervous system and the human mind were never designed to handle that kind of stress. So there's a new condition that comes out of World War I called shell shock. 2 syllables. Shell shock. And it's what happens. And there you can see movies that were taken of veterans, American and others, who had shell shock. And they cluck like chickens. And they try biting their own fingers off. And they try banging their heads through cinder block walls. These men have been burned out. Shocked. Some of them recover, some of them don't. Shell shock, pain, trauma. In the words, you can picture it. Pop, 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 bam! Shell shock. Well, in World War II, the same condition happens. But we've become more sophisticated, bureaucratic, and instead of calling the condition shell shock, in formal papers, the military calls this same condition battle fatigue. Battle fatigue. Like you got tuckered out running laps. Battle fatigue. 4 syllables. More soft, more indirect. It's still bam! Shell shock. But now it sounds better. In Vietnam, the same condition, and this is still what we call it today, is called post-traumatic stress disorder. 16 syllables. Completely leached of human suffering. As clinical as halitosis. A bunch of syllables that together mean what? Post-traumatic stress disorder. It's shell shock. It's a person who's been pushed so far that their mind breaks. But post-traumatic stress disorder sounds like a skin condition. It's easier, even though it's longer. And now we just call it PTSD. He's got PTSD. Well, real PTSD is shell shock. That's euphemism. That is progressive euphemism, using soft language to hide hard truth. Well, you wouldn't want the bureaucrats getting worried on their way home or suffering thinking about all the shell shock. Oh, so post-traumatic stress disorder. Oh, that's nice. There are people, oh God, the world, our country right now is filled with them. People who really believe that if they change the words that people use for things, they're going to make the world a better place. So Pluto is not a planet. And I could go on. You know what I'm talking about. You know the language police. Oh, don't use that word, use this word. To which I say, me, this is a R, me, I will choose my words. It's one of the few things in life I have total control over. I will choose my words. And if you don't like them, tough toenails. You don't get to limit my free speech because it disturbs you. Euphemism. The final solution to the Jewish question, which is going to start with finding a replacement for the Einsatzkommandos. It's the attempted murder of an entire race of people. In fact, after World War II, a new word has to be invented and developed and utilized. Genocide. Genocide is the attempted murder of an entire race of people. Genocide. Yep. That's what the final solution is. Now, most Americans know the final solution as the Holocaust. And the word Holocaust means the hottest part of an oven. But the truth is, the Holocaust is only a small part of the final solution to the Jewish question. It's the most intense phase of killing. Now, the first solution that the Wannsee Conference comes up with is tried at Chelmno death camp in Poland. Most of the places that were used for killing were in Poland or southern Lithuania. At Chelmno death camp, Jews who were marked for death, which is most of them, because it was a death camp, were loaded into the back of panel trucks, vans. And these panel trucks had a light inside, and they were going to go on a work detail, obviously. That happened. People left the camps to go on work details. Why you'd bring old women and children, I don't know, but I'm sure you've got a reason, Mr. Nazi guard. And when they were loaded into the trucks would start driving. They drive for around 40, 45 minutes. But the exhaust pipe was vented into the chamber, into the cargo compartment. So everyone inside died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, there were problems with this, but you could get an entire truckload of Jews dead in 45 minutes, and you didn't have to aim down your iron sights at them. It was better than the Einsatzkommandos. But there had to be certain engineering problems that would be solved. For example, the Jews are so inconsiderate. As they die, they'd flail and break the light bulb. Do you know how expensive it is and how irritating it is to replace a light bulb for every trip? And you need a light bulb, otherwise you'll panic the cargo, because the cargo, yes, another euphemism. They're not Jews, they're not people, they're the cargo. The cargo will panic if they get into a dark chamber, so you need a light bulb. So an engineer comes up with a metal grill that goes over the light bulb that's going to make it much more difficult for dying Jews to slap and break it. There's another problem. When a human body dies, all of the waste in our bladders and in our bowels evacuate. It's messy. So the Sonderkommandos, the Jewish slaves, would have a heck of a time after a trip. It would take a while. The bodies would have to be taken out, and they're covered in yick, and they've got to be, their clothes have got to be taken off, and they're either going to be laundered or burned or whatever, and it's messy. So the Jews were stripped. They would strip before they went into the truck. That might panic them, but you tell them whatever you need to tell them so the cargo doesn't panic. But still, they're covered in their own waste. And it takes time, and you slip and fall. It's just yicky. So an engineer comes up with another solution. You know those grates that you see in pet stores that animals are on? They're like on a grill, and they're doing their thing, they're playing around, but they're on a grill. Well, this is developed for the Chelmno death fans, or it's adapted to them, because by putting the Jews on a grill like that, what you do is the waste flows down onto the grill. The Jews have minimal waste on them. It's easier to take the bodies to be burned or buried or whatever. And so you put a grill over the light bulb, and you put a grill over the floor of the van a few inches up so that the Jews aren't covered. Hose things out. There's a solution to every problem in the final solution. Just get engineers to do it. Now think about this. This is to me what typifies the Nazi approach to anti-Semitism, you shall not live, versus the Russian. The Russians had Cossacks drunk on blood and lust. Ah! Raping and murdering and killing, and they were bad. But it was basically people in the midst of blood frenzy. The Nazis got guys with pocket protectors and slide rules to design a more efficient assembly line of death. Product is moved to processing facilities where it is processed. More euphemism from the Nazis. Product are Jewish men, women, and children. Processing facilities are death camps. Processing is killing them and destroying the bodies. It's just an engineering problem. But it's wartime, and the Germans don't have a reliable source of oil except Romania. They've got to rely on synthetic fuel. So that the gas vans aren't ideal. So somebody comes up with a solution and demonstrates it to the leader of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, to use these crystals that, if you pour liquid on them, produces Zyklon-B gas. And Zyklon-B gas has heretofore been used to fumigate homes and businesses. It's an insecticide. You activate the Zyklon-B, and it fills all the spaces inside a building, and all the roaches and rats die. Well, Jews are basically like roaches and rats. They're vermin, according to Nazi ideology. So let's put the Jews in a gas chamber. But you'll panic them if you put them in a gas chamber, because it looks like a gas chamber. Well, not if it looks like a shower. A massive shower. Now, at Treblinka, the purest of the death camps, Treblinka was basically a railroad station and the processing facilities and a few barracks for the guards and slaves, and that's about it. There was nothing else. Jews came in through the gate and out through the chimney. At Treblinka, they had barbers actually there. What the Jews were told is, you've arrived and you're going to be put to work in the East. Well, we're now in the East. And the Jews thought that they were going to be peasants in the fields, working and growing food for the Germans. It's not an ideal solution, but at least they'll be alive. But when they arrive, the men are separated from the women and children. The men are sent in first. And they're stripped down, and they sit down, and they're given haircuts. And then when they're going to go clean up, doors get shut, gas comes in, dead Jews. Why did they do this? Because what kind of psychopath cuts somebody's hair moments before they're going to be assassinated, executed, murdered? Think about that. It lulls the product into passivity, into a false sense of security. The way that beef cattle are kept calm, the smells and the sounds and the sights of the slaughterhouse are kept from the beef cattle until they walk in, and then it's too late. They're electrocuted, and tasty, tasty steak. The Jews are kept calm by the fiction that they're going to be workers. Then the women and children go in. and they get their hair cut, and they're gassed. But Treblinka's gas chamber is small. It takes a while. It's inefficient. More efficient than anywhere else, but it's still not efficient enough. Auschwitz in southern Poland is the greatest of the death camps. It's both a concentration camp to house enemies of the state, which include Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, devout Roman Catholics, devout Protestants, and anyone else who is an enemy of the state, communists, trade unionists, and so forth. The second part of Auschwitz is a labor camp. The IG Farben Chemical Company has a chemical plant at Auschwitz. Now, I used to live near a chemical plant. When I was your age, I lived near American Cyanamid, which was a chemical plant in Wallingford, Connecticut. And we were a mile or two or three away from it, but it was still, you could still smell it on most days. It just filled the air. I'm convinced it gave my sisters long-term health problems. But an American chemical factory in the 1980s had safety regulations and lots of safety regulations and safety protocols, all designed to keep the workers from dying and the chemicals from escaping. Union Carbide Company ran a chemical plant in Bhopal, India, and it didn't have all those namby-pamby safety rules. And in 1984 or 85, I have difficulty remembering, there was an accident, and the gas hit an entire heavily populated Indian city, Bhopal, killing countless numbers of people, maiming and wounding countless others. Well, IG Farben didn't have to worry about any of that. The Jews were planned to be usable for about 6 months. They'd come in, they'd be fed substandard food, and they would be slowly dying of being exposed to these deadly chemicals, and they'd work themselves to death. And that's productive, it's profitable, and it's good for the war effort, so the Germans liked that. But then there was the medical experiments that were done at Auschwitz. Dr. Josef Mengele became world famous for his twins experiments, where he would have two twins, and one's a control group and one's the experimental group. And because they're identical twins, they are as genetically identical as people get. You know, no cloning back then. So you have one twin that you put in a pressure chamber, and you eliminate the pressure and see at what point does a person die of pressure, at what altitude does a person lose the ability to breathe, at what altitude does their blood vessels rupture or their skin rupture. And so you have this, or another experiment is at what percentage of blood can be formaldehyde and still keep people alive. And he would do things like separate conjoined twins and conjoin twins that were normal into conjoined twins through operations. I mean, it's some pretty sick stuff. So that was done at Auschwitz-Birkenau. And then there was the death camp. The death camp was massive. Trainloads of Jews would show up. The men again would be separated out, and they'd go through first. Why? Because you don't want men doing their stupid fight thing. So the men would go through, and they'd be processed, and then it would be the turn of the women and children. You keep the women and children together. They keep each other controlled. And as the women and children went in, just as the men before them, they would have to take off all of their gear, their rings, any earrings they had, all their clothes, put them in separate places. In Auschwitz, or was it Treblinka? In one of those places, the storehouses of all the stuff the Jews took away, took off when they were stripped down, was called America. That was where all of the stuff was, America. What's weird is that Hitler's train during World War II was also called America. To the Germans of that time, America was a land of hope. It was synonymous with hope. So America, the land of riches, is where all the Jews' property is. And once they are done stripping down, they go into the showers. The showers, 5-10 times the size of this room. Showers all over the ceiling. Hundreds could be gassed at once. Assembly line of death. And then the bodies were taken out and burned in ovens. Now, there are stories of Jewish skin being used to make lampshade. I am dubious of that. There are stories of Jewish fat being rendered down to make soap. That might have happened in certain cases. The wife of one concentration camp commander was particularly sadistic, and she'd pull stuff like that. However, with the haircuts, the hair was actually used. It was sent back to Germany and used for wigs. Because, women need wigs sometimes, and sometimes men need wigs because of war wounds. You get hit with a flamethrower, you're still alive, you probably want to put a wig over that scalp of yours. The Jews were killed in the most profitably efficient way possible. That's a very German way of approaching it. And it all worked because of euphemism and because of building this assembly line of death. You shall not live. What ends it? Soviet troops, British troops, and American troops liberating the camps. When our troops liberated Buchenwald, a fairly small death camp in Western Germany, our men couldn't believe the smell before we even got there. They looked into the gates. They saw what they thought were the dead piled up like cordwood. But then in some cases, the dead began to move. These skeletal figures with translucent flesh, thin legs, giant knees, who had been systematically starved for years, began shuffling like zombies towards our troops. Troops opened the gates. And then, out of a sense of mercy, our troops fed them. And many of the people who survived years of Nazi care didn't survive more than an hour of American generosity because their stomachs were so shrunken and their systems were so weak. They couldn't handle the food. Many died. We'll conclude this and we'll go into what happened after World War II next time. Thank you.